Masechta Shabbos, Perek Yud, Mishnah Aleph. Hamatzniya lezera ledugma l'refua v'yitzir b'Shabbos chayv b'kol shehu. We learned in Perek Zayin that a person is not mechuyev for hoitzah, for something, unless he carries out an amount of it that's considered significant by most people. So as we discussed in Perek Zayin, Ches and Tes, we listed many items and identified the minimum shear that each one is considered chashuv. This Mishnah begins by speaking of someone who regards a davar chashuv, even a quantity that's smaller than the standard. If someone stored a small amount of seed, he put it in a safe place before Shabbos, intending to plow it, to show it as a sample to customers, or to use it as medicine. Dugma means as a sample. We have that in a few places here in Bava Metzia. And he took it out on Shabbos to Rosh Hashanah. Chayiv, he's chayiv for hoitzah, even a single seed. By storing a small amount, he showed that it's chashuv to him. Therefore, he's chayiv for hoitzah, even if it's less than the regular shear. In fact, we already mentioned this at the end of Perek Zayin Mishnah Gimel. Our Mishnah repeats it to teach that even a person who stored the seed and forgot about it, and then took it into Rosh Hashanah for no particular reason, he's still chayiv, since he considered it important at one time. So he was never mevatel the chashivas, which is interesting because you would have thought that if he forgot about it, so everybody says it's not chashiv. Lama zagan something about yush shaloi midas yush. So he forgot about it, so he's not thinking about it anymore. So we can move on from that. But over here, for some reason, we're still being machshav it. Any other person, however, is not mechuyev unless he takes a standard amount, because he presumably doesn't attach the chashivas to the smaller shear. Likewise, if the person who was machshav the very small amount changed his mind and decided not to use it for the purpose he intended, such as planting, and then brought it back into the Rishus HaYochid, once he was mevatel this idea of chashivas outside, he's not chayiv unless he carried out the smaller shear, which would be mechayiv for a regular person, not for somebody who's a matzniah. Since he changed his mind, the smaller amount stopped being chashuv to him. Since he decided not to use the seeds for the original purpose, they lose the chashivas they had previously. At this point, it becomes like any other person who is not mechuyev unless he carries out the standard shear. Had he merely forgotten why he had stored it, so he would still have its chashivas, as we mentioned earlier. However, here he didn't just forget; he knowingly changed his mind, b'dafka, and decided that he would not use them for the original purpose. In that case, it's certainly no longer chashuv to him. Mishnah Beis, Hamaitzi Eichlin Unasan Ala Eskufa. Person is chayiv for hoitzah by removing an item from a Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Now, what if the hoitzah wasn't completed in a single course of action, was interrupted in the middle? So, Hamaitzi Eichlin Unasan Ala Eskufa, if someone took out food from his house, which is Rosh Hashanah, and placed it in the front of his house on a porch, which is a karmelis, which is not a Rosh Hashanah or a Rosh Hashanah. We mentioned earlier that a karmelis is an area of certain dimensions. It's not a Rosh Hashanah or a Rosh Hashanah. Mina Torah, one's mutter, one is allowed to transfer an object from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah into a karmelis or vice versa. The Chacham, however, decreed that one may not move something into or out of a karmelis. The Mishnah uses the term eskufa here to refer to a porch between the house and the street that's at least 4 tvachim wide, 4 tvachim long, and between 3 and 9 tvachim high. An area smaller than 4 by 4 tvachim is not even a karmelis, is considered a makom patur. Carrying into and out of a makom patur is going to be mutter even with Rabbana. If the porch was lower than 3 tvachim, it would be considered part of the Rosh Hashanah. If it were 10 or more tvachim, it would be considered Rosh Hashanah in its own right. If it were between 9 and 10 tvachim high, it would also be part of the Rosh Hashanah because the public would use it by momentarily resting their packages on it in order to reposition it on their backs or on their shoulders by Amdel Katef. So, bein shechazav ha'itzion, bein sheitzion acher, part of b'nei shaloi osam malachta b'vas achas. Halacha is that whether he himself moved it from the porch to the street, or whether someone else came and transferred it from the porch to the street, he's patur, because he did not do his malacha of hoitzah in one stage. Rather, he broke it up into 2 parts. First, he took the item onto the porch, which he's not chayiv, because the porch is a karmelis, and then here someone else took it from the porch to the Rosh Hashanah, which is also not chayiv, because it went from a karmelis to Rosh Hashanah. In order to be chayiv for hoitzah, one must take an object from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, or vice versa, in a single process, without putting it down in a karmelis or any other type of neutral domain in any way. Fine. Similar case, if someone took a basket filled with produce from his house and placed it in front of the house on an outer porch, which would have the status as Rosh Hashanah, but he positioned the basket in a way that part of it's still in the Rosh Hashanah and a part of it's in the Rosh Hashanah. The halacha is that even if most of the produce of the basket is outside in the Rosh Hashanah, partly because he did not take out the entire basket outside, Ad sheyotzi as kol hakupa is not chayiv unless he takes out the entire basket to Rosh Hashanah without leaving part of it inside. In order to be chayiv, he must transfer at least one entire peri that's in there to the Rosh Hashanah. Mishnah Gimel. If someone does haitzah in his right hand or in his left hand, or the garment that's next to his chest, the garment was made in such a way that it could hold things between it and the person's chest, with some kind of pocket inside, or on his shoulder, chayiv. He is chayiv because he carried it in a normal manner. Now, what's considered a normal manner? So the Mishnah explains, Shekain Ma'aseh B'nei Kahos. It's clear from the Torah that even carrying on one shoulder is normal because that's how they loaded the Kalim and the Mishkan by the B'nei Kahos, like the pasuk says, by Kosef Yisou. So by Al Kseifa is regular derech haitzah. Kalach hayad, someone carried something literally on the back of his hand or something in an unusual manner. Beraglei, bepiv, b'marpakai, ba'ozlei, b'sairai, with his foot or in his mouth. Meaning if he carries out a shoe in his mouth, not food, because food is normal for doing so. Wouldn't definitely b'chai if he goes out with food in his mouth. Or b'marpakai, in the crook of his elbow, he's holding it in his elbow. Ba'oznai, in his ear, b'sairai, or he stuck something in his ear, and it's not the derech to go out with that. Ubefundasoi ubepil lamata, in his money belt with its opening facing down, which means that he stored the coins in a money belt and tied its opening shut, but he wore the belt in such a way that the opening is face downward. This is an unusual way to carry coins because if the tie becomes undone, the coins will fall out. If the opening were facing forward, he would be chayav because that's a normal way of carrying coins. Between his money belt and his cloak, or in the hem of the bottom of his cloak, he tucked the object between his money belt and his garment. Carrying an object in this manner is usually not secure there. Or b'sandalai, he carries a spoon in his shoe or in his sandal. In all these cases, he's pater because he did not do haitzah in the normal manner of those who are mitzi things. Zok the Mishnah Dalet Hamiskaven lahoitzi ubalei lufanov, ubalei laacharav pater. Hamiskaven lahoitzi lufanov ubalei laacharav pater. The Torah refers to the malachos of Shabbos as a malachas machshavas, a calculated malacha for which it's learned that a person is mechuyev, is chayev, for performing a malacha only if he intended to do it. So if one intended to perform something that's mutter, and by accident performed the malacha that was asur, for example, he picked up a vegetable from the ground thinking it was already plucked, but in fact it was still attached to the ground, so he unwittingly committed the malacha of kaitzer. This is called masasek, one who commits an unwitting act. As we mentioned in the Akdamat al-Masechta, in such a case he would be pater. The following Mishnah teaches that in certain cases this patur applies even if one did intend to do a malacha, but accidentally performed it in a way that was inferior to the one that he had planned. Meaning it didn't end up the way that he wanted it exactly. If one intends to transfer an item suspended in front of him, but he completes the haitzah, but by the time he completed the haitzah, it slides around and goes behind him. The person is wearing a purse over his shoulder, let's say, and it was wearing it in front of him, and then by the time he was done, it was wrapped around his neck, someone was hanging it behind him. So carrying an article in front of one's body is better than carrying it behind one's back, because one can easily guard it and protect it when it's in front of him. Therefore, if one intends to carry something from in front of him, but it shifts around to the back, the haitzah is completed in a manner that was shaloi b'miskaven, so it's not considered malachas b'chshavas. Now, however, if it was la'achar of a balei lefanav, in the opposite case, where one intends to transfer an item suspended behind him, but before he completes the haitzah, it slides around and goes in front of him, he's chayev, since the resulting act is better than the one he intended, which he is chayev for. Even though he ended up carrying the object in a way he did not intend, he's presumably content with the result. This suffices for it to be considered a malacha, which he did have intended. Malachas machshavas, it's almost like we're stooping the malachas machshavas in your face. But l'maisa, at the end of the day, it is better this way. Right? Hagam, that we didn't ask you, but it is better that way. Be'emes amru, the halacha l'moshe b'sinai is, in the truth they said, ha'isha ha'chigaris b'sinor, bein v'lfaneho, bein v'lacharach, ha'yadas shekein roi li ha'yischayza. For the second time already, we're having the Mishnah tell us be'emes amru, which is halacha l'moshe b'sinai, called be'emes halachihi, as the Rab says in Trumas, beginning of Parak Beis, and Tosfos discusses on Daf, on we're going to say Yud Beis and Yud Beis, but I don't know that that's correct. If a woman wears an underskirt, a sinor, it was an item of clothing that was worn for purposes of modesty, and transfers something that's attached to the skirt, she's chayav whether the item slides in front of her or behind her, because a woman knows that it's normal for it to turn around, for this to move around when she walks, and any attached item will move along with it. Since she knew that the item could move from the front to the back, or from the back to the front, as she intended to carry it in either position. Therefore, even if it was originally in front of her, and then it was moved to the back, she's not potter on the grounds that it was not bekavana. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Af Kable Piskin. Rabbi Yehuda says even those who receive royal letters to deliver are chayiv for Hitzah regardless of whether the tube in which the letters are carried slides in front of him or behind him. As in the previous case, the letter carrier knows that it's normal for the tube that he's carrying the letters in to move around when he runs. Since he realizes from the start, he's going to be chayiv even if it slips behind him. The Tanakama, however, paskins that unlike the woman, Hachigeres V'Sinor, the person who's Makabel Pitkin from the Melach is part if he puts the tube in front of him and shifts it to the back, because this is not so likely to happen that we can view it as being his kavanah l'chatchila. Masha'enken B'isha Hachigeres V'Sinor is a saka difference. That's why Yehuda's chelik over here. I mean, he's not chelik, he extends the previous ruling on to the king's mail carriers who would carry royal letters on tubes flowing from their necks. Ve'ein halacha kirav Yehuda. Mishnah Hey, Hamaitzi Kikar L'Reshus Rabin Chayiv. We learned that if one person did the first part of a malacha and another person did the second half of the malacha, both are potter, both do not have to bring a korban chatas. The Mishnah teaches a halacha regarding two people who did an entire malacha from beginning to end. Hamaitzi Kikar L'Reshus Rabin Chayiv, one whose maitzi carries out a loaf of bread from Reshus Rabin to a Reshus from Reshus Yochid to Reshus Rabin, is chayiv because he did the entire malacha himself. This halacha is obvious, but it is stated by the Mishnah to introduce the next halachas. But if two people transferred it together, they did every part of the malacha together. Both of them picked up the item in the Reshus Yochid, carried it to the Reshus Rabin, and did a hanacha over there. Both of them are partner because neither performed the entire malacha on his own. This is learned out from the Torah that when two people do malacha together, they're partner. Shnaim shasua p'turin. In order to be chayiv, one person must do the entire malacha himself. The koich of a tzibur, you have a friend, you get away with things. Lo yachal lecha lo yitziyah. However, if one person could not carry it by himself because it was too heavy, and two people transferred it together, chayov, they're both chayiv because in this case, each is viewed as though he performed the entire malacha, because the only way to carry such an item is by sharing the task with someone else. It is therefore normal for two people to do it together. Therefore, they're going to be chayiv. Reb Shimon says because neither of them did the entire malacha. Reb Shimon learns from a pasuk that two people who perform a malacha together are always pater, even if the malacha can only be done with two people, which is bechiddush, but that's how he learns the psukim. If one does haitzah less than the minimum amount of food in a kli, pater afal kli is pater even for carrying the kli. Why is that? Shakli tfeilaleh, because the vessel, the keli, is secondary to the food. Since he's using the container only to hold the food, it has no independent significance. As a chai b'mita, which reminds me of a story. Rav Scheinberg, Zichron Lavracha, used to wear a lot of tzitzis. And, he looked very, very large at some times because his tzitzis were so many pairs. And they say that Rav Hutner was once by a wedding in Montreal and they were waiting for Rav Scheinberg to come to the chasana. And they say that Rav Hutner said that maybe they stopped him by the border because they thought he was smuggling tzitzis in. I don't know why it reminded me of that story, but the keli is secondary to the food. Since he's using the container only to hold the food, has no independent significance. As a chai b'mita. Likewise, if one transfers a live person on a bed, pater aval amita, he's pater even if he carries he's pater not only for carrying the person, because chaynai say it's atzmai, but even for carrying the bed, shamita tfeilah, because the bed is secondary to the person. As hameis b'mita chayiv. However, one who transfers a dead body on a bed is chayiv because a corpse is not noisei as atzmai, chaynai say as atzmai. This halacha applies even if his purpose in transferring the mace was purely the negative one of removing it from his house because it was tameh. And its new location, he doesn't care about where he puts it, he just wants to get it out of his house. Despite his lack of positive, constructive malachas v'achshavas, he's still chayiv. Chen kazayis ben ameis, the same law applies when one removes an item from his house in order to rid of it because of tumah, like a kazayis ben ameis, or kazayis ben anavela, of a dead animal, kadosh ben asharetz, or lentils volume of the carcass of one of the 8 species of creeping animals that transmit tumah when it's dead. He's a chayiv. In all these cases, he's chayiv, even though his purpose was negative. Reb Shimon paters one who transfers all or part of a dead body or an animal from his house, because l'shita said there's no chiyah for somebody who gets rid of something. Since the haitzah was done for a purely negative purpose, doesn't count as a malacha. It's a malacha she'en tzricha l'gufa. According to Reb Shimon, a malacha does not fall under the category of malachas machshavas. For this reason, Reb Shimon paskins the one's not chayiv for transferring any items listed in the Mishnah, even an entire mace, since he only does so to remove the source of tumah from his house. The Tanakama, however, holds that isn't leches machshavas, and he would be chayiv. Mishnah Vav. If one removes his fingernails by pulling at one with the other, or by biting them with his teeth, if one removes the hair of his head, or the hair of his mustache, or the hair of his beard by plucking it out with his hand, or if a woman braids her hair, paints her eyes, or parts her hair, Rabbi Lezer says that the person is mechuyev min Torah for geizes. Removing his fingernails are a told of geizes, braiding and parting one's hair are told of baina, and painting one's eyes are a told of kaisev. However, the Chachamim say that these malachas are also only midrabanan because removing a fingernail or hair with one's hand is unusual. Braiding and parting one's hair are not a chiyuv of baina min Torah, and painting an eye is not the biblical form of kaisev. Nevertheless, all these actions are also midrabanan. One who plucks a plant from a pot that has a hole is chayav for kaitzer, because the plant absorbs nourishment from the ground beneath it through the hole, which suffices for it to be considered attached to the ground, as we explained throughout Seder Zerahim, the halachas of otat nokov and otat she'ein nokov. Since it's attached to the ground, plucking it out is, because it's yenik min karka, then he's going to be chayav for kaitzer. It's considered mechubal karka. She'ein nokov pater. However, one who plucks a plant from a pot that does not have a hole in it is pater, because the plant was not attached to the ground when he plucked it. Reb Shimon pater b'zeh b'zeh. However, Reb Shimon paskins, the one who plucks the plant from a pot is exempt in both cases, whether it has a hole or whether it doesn't. According to Reb Shimon, the plant of any type of pot is not mechuyev min Torah as attached to the ground. I wonder if Reb Shimon holds like that throughout Seder Zerahim also, which would be interesting. The not that it would be us, not that it would be mutter, but upon him he'd be potter. Wouldn't have to be mechay. Wouldn't have to bring a korban chatas for that. Ad kan, we will resume the share next one with Hashem Perek Yud Aleph.